12 people, hand-picked, to change the entire world. Here's the question nobody asks about the disciples, not who were they. Why them? Because if you were God, if you had one shot to launch the most important movement in human history, you would not have picked these people. You would have picked scholars, priests, politicians, people with influence, credibility, connections. Jesus picked fishermen. He picked a tax collector, which in first-century Judea was basically a traitor working for the Roman occupation. He picked a political radical who probably came to the group with a concealed weapon. He picked someone who would publicly deny knowing him 3 times on the worst night of his life. And one of them sold him out for 30 pieces of silver. So why them? Because the answer to that question is going to completely reframe how you think about what God looks for in a person. The word disciple just means student or follower. In first-century Jewish culture, it was normal for a rabbi, a teacher, to gather students who would travel with him, learn from him, and eventually go out and teach others what they'd learned. Every other rabbi waited for students to come to him. Students would apply, prove themselves worthy, earn their place. Jesus did the opposite. He went to them in the middle of their workday and said 2 words. Follow me. No application, no qualifications, no background check. Just follow me. And here is what is genuinely strange. They did. Now let's meet them. Because most people can name maybe 3. Simon Peter. Simon was a fisherman from a town called Bethsaida on the Sea of Galilee. Not a small hobby fisherman. This was his livelihood, his family business, his entire world. He was loud, impulsive, passionate to a fault, the kind of man who spoke before he thought and acted before he planned. When Jesus walks up to him and his brother Andrew hauling nets on the shore, he doesn't give a long explanation or make a persuasive argument. He just says, "Follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men." Simon drops his nets and goes. That's the first thing you need to know about Peter. He moves fast, he commits completely, and he gets it wrong almost as often as he gets it right. He's the one who jumps out of a boat in the middle of a storm to walk on water toward Jesus and immediately starts sinking because he takes his eyes off him and looks at the waves. He's the one who draws a sword in the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus is arrested and cuts off a soldier's ear, because that was apparently his plan. He's the one who tells Jesus at the Last Supper that even if everyone else abandons him, he never will. Absolutely certain. Unshakable. And then that same night, standing around a fire while Jesus is being tried inside, 3 different people say, "Weren't you with him?" And 3 times Peter says, "I don't know what you're talking about." 3 denials, exactly as Jesus predicted. Peter goes out and weeps bitterly. That's rock bottom. And yet, Jesus renames him Peter, which means rock, before any of that happened, as if he could already see what Peter would become on the other side of his failures. After the resurrection, Peter becomes the central figure of the early church. He preaches on the day of Pentecost, and 3,000 people respond in a single day. He travels through the region, plants churches, leads. He writes 2 letters that end up in the New Testament. He eventually makes it to Rome, the capital of the empire that executed Jesus. According to early church tradition, Peter was crucified there under the Emperor Nero, but he refused to be crucified the same way as Jesus. He said he wasn't worthy to die in the same position as his Lord. He was crucified upside down. The man who denied Jesus 3 times around a fire died insisting he wasn't even worthy to share the same posture of death. That is one of the most staggering character arcs in human history. Andrew. Andrew was Peter's brother, also a fisherman, also from Bethsaida. Where Peter is loud and front and center, Andrew is quieter, more behind the scenes. The kind of person who doesn't need the spotlight. But here's what Andrew actually does in the Gospels. He's the first disciple called. Before Peter, before anyone, he hears John the Baptist point to Jesus and immediately follows. And what does he do next? He goes and finds his brother Simon and says, "We've found the Messiah," and brings him to Jesus. Andrew doesn't keep it to himself. He immediately thinks about who else needs to know. Later, when Jesus is about to feed 5,000 people, it's Andrew who finds the boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish and brings him forward. He says, "I know this isn't much, but here it is." He's the connector, the one who finds the resource and brings it to Jesus and lets Jesus do the rest. After the resurrection, Andrew travels extensively through what is now Turkey, Greece, and Eastern Europe. Early church tradition says he preached across a vast region and planted churches throughout. He was eventually arrested in the Greek city of Patras by the Roman governor Aegeus, whose wife had become a Christian partly through Andrew's influence. Aegeus wasn't happy about that. Andrew was condemned to crucifixion. According to tradition, he was tied, not nailed, to an X-shaped cross, a design that now bears his name. The X-Cross of St. Andrew appears on the flags of Scotland and the United Kingdom to this day. He reportedly preached from the cross for 2 days before he died, the quiet one behind the scenes, still talking until the very end. James, son of Zebedee. James was a fisherman, son of a man named Zebedee, brother of John. Jesus nicknames James and John the sons of thunder, Boanerges in Aramaic, which tells you immediately these are not gentle, quiet men. There's a moment in Luke where Jesus and the disciples are traveling through a Samaritan village, and the people there refuse to welcome them. James and John turn to Jesus and say, "Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven on them?" Actual fire from heaven on a village. Jesus turns around and rebukes them. But that's who James was, passionate, intense, all in. He was one of the inner circle, the 3 disciples who were present at the most significant private moments. The Transfiguration, where Jesus' appearance changed and his clothes became blazing white on a mountaintop. The Garden of Gethsemane on the night of the arrest. James got closer than most to the center of what was happening. He was also the first of the 12 to die for it. Around 44 AD, just over a decade after the crucifixion, King Herod Agrippa I had James arrested and executed by the sword. It's the only death of one of the 12 recorded in the New Testament itself. The son of thunder, the first martyr among the 12, gone within a decade. The movement didn't stop. John, son of Zebedee. John is one of the most fascinating transformations in the entire New Testament. He starts as a son of thunder, wanting to call fire down on villages, arguing with the other disciples about who is the greatest, jostling for position. He and James even send their mother to ask Jesus if they can sit at his right and left hand in the kingdom. Jesus says, "You don't know what you're asking for." And yet, John is the disciple described in his own gospel as the one Jesus loved. Not because Jesus didn't love the others, but because John seems to have understood something about intimacy with Jesus that the others were still working toward. He's the only one of the 12 who stands at the foot of the cross. Everyone else has fled. John is there. Jesus, dying on the cross, looks down and sees his mother Mary standing beside John. And he says, "Woman, here is your son." And to John, "Here is your mother." From that moment, John takes Mary into his own home and cares for her. The son of thunder became the man who stayed when everyone else ran. John goes on to write more of the New Testament than almost anyone else. The Gospel of John, 3 letters. The Book of Revelation. The Gospel of John is theologically the deepest of the 4. The letters are saturated with one phrase that appears over and over. God is love. Little children, love one another. This is how we know we are in the light. This is the same man who wanted to call fire down on a village. He's eventually exiled by the Roman Emperor Domitian to a small island called Patmos in the Aegean Sea, where he writes Revelation. Then he's released and lives out his old age in Ephesus. John is the only one of the 12 who doesn't die a violent death. He dies of old age, surrounded by the church he built, reportedly repeating one phrase to anyone who would listen in his final years. Little children love one another, the last son of thunder, gone quiet and full of love. Philip. Philip was from Bethsaida, same town as Peter and Andrew. He's one of the first called, and he immediately goes to find his friend Nathanael. Philip is the practical one, the logical thinker, the man who needs the numbers to work. When Jesus asks him how they're going to feed 5,000 people in a remote place, Philip doesn't look around for a miracle. He immediately calculates. 8 months' wages wouldn't buy enough bread for everyone to have a bite. He's not faithless, he's just wired to assess the situation before he believes the impossible is coming. Later at the Last Supper, Philip says to Jesus, "Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us." Jesus says, "Philip, I've been with you this long, and you still don't know me. Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father." Philip is the man who keeps asking the direct question everyone else is thinking but won't say out loud. That's not a weakness, that's a gift. It just takes time to become fully calibrated to what Jesus is actually doing. After the resurrection, Philip travels extensively. Early church tradition places him in Greece, Syria, and Phrygia, modern-day Turkey, where he preaches and reportedly performs miracles. According to tradition, Philip was martyred in the city of Hierapolis in Asia Minor, crucified or possibly hanged upside down, still preaching as he died. The spreadsheet guy, the calculator, crucified, still asking questions that mattered. Bartholomew Nathanael's introduction to Jesus is one of the funniest and most unexpectedly moving moments in the entire Gospel of John. Philip finds him and says, "We've found the Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, son of Joseph." Nathanael says, "Nazareth. Can anything good come from Nazareth?" It's a genuine cultural insult. Nazareth was a backwater. Nobody important came from there. Nathanael is the person who hears a big claim and immediately says, "Yeah, I doubt that very much." Philip says, "Just come and see." So Nathanael goes, and before he can even open his mouth, Jesus says, "Here is a true Israelite in whom there is nothing false." Nathanael says, "How do you know me?" Jesus says, "I saw you under the fig tree before Philip called you." That's it. That's all it takes. Nathanael says, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus says, "You believe because I told you I saw you under a fig tree? You're going to see much greater things than that." One moment of being truly seen before the conversation even started, and the skeptic is completely undone. After the resurrection, Nathanael travels as far as India and Armenia, according to various early traditions. He is said to have been martyred in Armenia, flayed alive, and then crucified or beheaded depending on the source. The man who questioned whether anything good could come from Nazareth died on the other side of the world because of what came from Nazareth. Matthew. Matthew's story is the most socially scandalous calling in the entire group. Tax collectors in first-century Judea were Jews who collected taxes on behalf of Rome. They were given the right to collect a set amount and keep anything above it for themselves, which meant the system practically guaranteed corruption. They got rich by squeezing their own people. They worked for the occupying empire. They were considered traitors, extortioners, ceremonially unclean. The religious establishment had a category for the kinds of people you didn't associate with. Tax collectors were at the top of that list. Jesus walks past Matthew's tax booth on the road, looks at him, and says, "Follow me." Matthew gets up, leaves the booth, leaves the money, leaves everything, and follows. And then he throws a party. He invites all his tax collector friends and associates, the people nobody else would eat with, and introduces them to Jesus. The religious leaders are appalled. They pull the disciples aside and say, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus hears this and says, "It's not the healthy who need a doctor, it's the sick. I didn't come for the righteous, I came for sinners." Matthew, the traitor, the extortioner, the man the religious establishment had written off, writes the Gospel of Matthew, the most Jewish of the four Gospels, the one that opens with a genealogy connecting Jesus all the way back to Abraham, the one that records the Sermon on the Mount in full. The traitor becomes the most careful Jewish witness to the Jewish Messiah. After the resurrection, Matthew reportedly preached in Judea before traveling further afield, Ethiopia and Persia, according to various traditions. His death is the least certain of the 12. Some traditions say he died peacefully. Others say he was martyred. Either way, the man who made his living taking from his own people spent the rest of his life giving everything away. Thomas. Everyone calls him Doubting Thomas. That nickname is not fair. After the crucifixion, Jesus appears to the disciples in a locked room, but Thomas isn't there. When the others tell him, "We have seen the Lord," Thomas says something that has defined him ever since. "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." People say this like it's a character flaw, but look at the room he wasn't in. Everyone else who believed did so because they saw Jesus in person. Thomas is simply asking for the same thing the others got. He's not uniquely faithless, he's uniquely honest. A week later, Jesus appears again. This time, Thomas is there. Jesus walks straight to him and says, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas doesn't even touch the wounds. He just looks at Jesus and says, "My Lord and my God." The most direct, unambiguous declaration of the full divinity of Jesus in the entire Gospel of John, from the mouth of the man labeled the doubter. Jesus says, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Thomas then does something that almost no one knows about. He goes to India. This is not legend. This is one of the most historically consistent traditions in early Christianity. The Mar Thoma Church, the St. Thomas Church in Kerala, southern India, traces its founding directly to Thomas in the 1st century. It still exists. It has roughly 4 million members today. Thomas traveled further from Jerusalem than almost any of the 12, to a culture, a language, and a world entirely unlike anything he had grown up in. Alone, he was martyred near the city of Chennai, then called Madras, around 72 AD. According to tradition, he was run through with a spear. The doubter, the honest one, the man who needed to see, he saw. And then he went to India. James, son of Alphaeus. He's called James the Less, which just means he was shorter or younger than James, son of Zebedee. Almost nothing is recorded about him specifically in the Gospels. He's in the lists, he's in the room, he was there. But here is what that means. He witnessed the Sermon on the Mount, he was in the boat during the storm. He watched Lazarus walk out of a tomb. He was at the Last Supper, he was there when the risen Jesus appeared. After the resurrection, tradition places him preaching in Persia, Syria, and Egypt. He is generally believed to have been martyred. Some traditions say crucified, others say killed with a club. He gave everything for something most people couldn't even imagine dying for a story about. The quiet one, the overlooked one, still there, still faithful, all the way to the end. Thaddeus, he has one recorded moment in the Gospels, and it is a genuinely good question. At the Last Supper, Jesus is talking about how he will reveal himself to his followers. Thaddeus also called Judas son of James to distinguish him from the other. Judas asks, Lord, why do you intend to show yourself to us and not to the world? It's the question everyone in the room was probably thinking. If you're the Messiah, why not just show everyone? Why this small group? Why the hiddenness? Jesus doesn't give a simple answer. He talks about love and obedience and the Holy Spirit coming to teach them everything. Sometimes the most faithful thing you can do is ask the question that doesn't have an easy answer and then stay anyway. After the resurrection, tradition places Thaddeus in Mesopotamia, Persia, and Armenia. He is generally believed to have been martyred, killed with arrows or an axe, depending on the source. One recorded question in the Gospels: a lifetime of going where almost nobody else went. Death in a foreign land. Simon the Zealot. This one requires a moment to fully appreciate. The Zealots were a first-century Jewish political movement, radical nationalists. They believed that Roman occupation was an offense against God, and that violent resistance was not only justified, it was a religious duty. Some of them carried short, curved daggers hidden under their cloaks and used them on Roman soldiers and their collaborators in the streets. Simon was one of them. Matthew was a tax collector working for Rome. These two men were in the same group of 12, eating together, sleeping in the same places, learning from the same teacher for 3 years. In the normal world of first-century Judea, Simon would have viewed Matthew as an enemy worth eliminating. Matthew would have viewed Simon as a dangerous radical worth reporting. Jesus put them at the same table and told them both to love each other. Whatever happened in that group over 3 years, whatever arguments were had, whatever tensions were navigated, whatever transformation took place, Simon the Zealot became something the Zealot movement never produced. A man who traveled the world telling people about peace. Tradition places Simon in Persia, Egypt, Ethiopia, and possibly even Britain. He is generally believed to have been martyred in Persia, sawed in two, according to some traditions. The man who came in with a knife and a cause, he left with a gospel. Judas Iscariot. Judas is the one everyone knows, and the one nobody fully understands. He was the treasurer of the group. He held the money bag. He had the access, the proximity, the trust. The Gospel of John tells us he also used to help himself to what was in the money bag. So there was already something wrong underneath the surface before the betrayal. But here's what makes Judas complicated. He wasn't a stranger who infiltrated the group. He was there for all of it. He heard the Sermon on the Mount. He watched the miracles. He was at the Last Supper where Jesus washed his feet, knowing what was about to happen. For 30 pieces of silver, the price of a slave in the Old Testament, roughly 4 months of an average laborer's wages, Judas goes to the religious leaders and offers to hand Jesus over. He identifies him in the garden with a kiss, the most intimate greeting of the culture used as the signal for arrest. And then, when Judas sees that Jesus has been condemned, Matthew records that he was seized with remorse. He goes back to the religious leaders and throws the silver coins back at them and says, "I have sinned. I have betrayed innocent blood." They say, "What is that to us? That's your problem." Judas throws the coins into the temple, goes out, and hangs himself. He couldn't live with what he'd done, but he also couldn't find his way back. The money was used to buy a field called the Field of Blood. Judas is in the story for a reason. Because the story doesn't sanitize itself. Because Jesus chose him knowing what he would do. Because proximity to something extraordinary is not the same as being transformed by it, and because the most devastating betrayals almost always come from someone who had everything they needed to make a different choice. Look at this group again. A loud fisherman who denied Jesus and became the rock of the early church. A quiet connector nobody remembers who was probably the first person to bring someone else to Jesus. 2 brothers who wanted to call fire down on a village One became the first martyr. One became the apostle of love. A practical man who calculated why the miracle was impossible and watched it happen anyway. A skeptic who asked whether anything good could come from Nazareth and died in Armenia for the answer. A traitor who became the most careful Jewish witness to the Jewish Messiah. A doubter who needed to see the wounds and then travel to India. A quiet nobody who showed up every day without a spotlight. A man with one good question and a lifetime of faithfulness nobody recorded. A radical nationalist who sat at the same table as his enemy and called it family. And a betrayer who proved that closeness to Jesus is not the same as being changed by him. No scholars, no priests, no political connections. Just 12 ordinary people who said yes, most of them anyway, and between them covered more of the ancient world than any organized movement had any right to. Here's what makes this genuinely extraordinary. Every single one of them, except John, is believed to have been violently killed for what they proclaimed. They had seen the risen Jesus. They knew what they had seen. And not one of them, not even under arrest, not even on a cross, not even being sawed in two, took it back. People die for things they believe to be true all the time. Nobody dies for something they personally know to be a lie. 12 people from one tiny corner of the Roman Empire. Within one generation, India, Ethiopia, Armenia, Greece, Rome, possibly Britain. No social media, no printing press, no infrastructure, no budget. Just 12 ordinary people who had seen something they couldn't stop talking about. And the world has never been the same.